The sky over the Sterling household had been a bruised purple all afternoon, heavy with the promise of the seasonal October gale. Inside, the atmosphere was even more suffocating. 15-year-old Megan stood in the kitchen, clutching a crumpled flyer for the Allstate Science Fair. She had placed first again. It was a milestone that should have earned her a celebratory dinner or, at the very least, a proud nod from her father. Instead, the flyer felt like lead in her hand. In this house, Megan's achievements were treated like background noise, a static hum that everyone ignored. The melody of the home was dictated entirely by Catherine, her 12-year-old sister. "Mom, look! I practiced my routine 3 times, and my ankle really hurts now," Catherine whined, limping theatrically into the kitchen. Their mother, Patricia, immediately dropped the towel she was holding. "Oh, my poor baby. Come here, let me see. Megan, move out of the way, your sister needs the stool." Megan stepped back, her blue ribbon still tucked in her pocket unseen. "I won the regional, Mom," she murmured, almost to herself. "That's nice, dear. Catherine, do you need an ice pack?" This was the rhythm of Megan's life. Being a ghost in a house she helped keep quiet. She had learned to be small, to be the easy child so that Catherine could be the difficult one. But as the wind began to howl against the window pane that evening, the dynamic shifted from neglect to something far more sinister. The storm broke at precisely 7 p.m. Rain lashed against the siding like gravel, and thunder rolled with a frequency that made the floorboards vibrate. The tension reached a breaking point during dinner. Catherine had been unusually quiet, her eyes darting toward Megan with a cold, calculating glint that Megan had learned to fear. It started with a stolen phone. Catherine had found her own smartphone in Megan's backpack earlier that day, a device she had hidden there herself. Then, she showed their parents a series of horrific, fabricated messages sent from Megan's social media account, mocking Catherine's appearance and wishing she had never been born. "I didn't write those!" Megan cried out, standing up so fast her chair scraped harshly against the tile. "Dad, she's logged into my laptop. She's framing me!" Their father, Richard, slammed his fist on the table. The silverware rattled. "Enough, Megan! Why are you so obsessed with tearing your sister down? She's sensitive, and you're just cold." "I'm not cold. I'm tired of her lying." Catherine let out a jagged, heaving sob. It was a sound she had perfected, the sound of a victim. She stood up, trembling. "It's okay, Dad. I'll just go to my room. I'm used to her hating me." As Catherine turned to leave, she purposefully clipped Megan's shoulder. When Megan tried to steady her, Catherine threw herself backward against the corner of the hutch. A porcelain vase, a family heirloom, shattered into 1,000 white shards. Catherine let out a piercing scream. She clutched her forearm, which she had pre-bruised earlier with a heavy hairbrush. "She pushed me. Mom, she hit me." The silence that followed was more terrifying than the thunder. Richard stood up, his face a mask of disgusted fury. He looked at the shattered porcelain, then at Catherine's bruised arm, and finally at Megan. "You've crossed a line, Megan," Richard said, his voice terrifyingly low. "First the bullying, then the theft, and now you're physically assaulting your sister in our own home." "I didn't touch her. She fell on purpose." Megan's voice was high and panicked. She looked at her mother, pleading. "Mom, you saw her. She's been doing this all week." Patricia didn't look up. She was busy cradling Catherine, whispering soothing words into her ear. "I think she's dangerous, Richard," Patricia whispered. She's not right in the head." Richard stepped toward Megan. The light from the chandelier cast deep shadows over his eyes. "Your mother is right. There is something fundamentally wrong with you. You're sick. You're a broken, spiteful girl, and I won't have you poisoning this house any longer." "What are you saying?" Megan's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I want you out," Richard growled. "I don't need a sick daughter like you under my roof. Get out. Now." "Dad, it's a hurricane outside. Where am I supposed to go?" "That isn't my concern anymore." Maybe the cold will wake you up to the person you've become. He grabbed Megan by the arm. His grip was like iron, bruising her skin. He dragged her toward the mudroom. Megan struggled, screaming for her mother, but Patricia remained turned away, her back a wall of indifference. Catherine peeked over her mother's shoulder. For a fleeting second, the tears vanished. She offered Megan a small, jagged smile of Victor's grin. The door flew open, and the freezing rain rushed in like an invading army. With a final, violent shove, Richard cast his eldest daughter into the darkness. "Don't come back until you're someone we can stand to look at," he shouted over the wind. The heavy oak door slammed shut. The bolt clicked. Megan stood on the porch for a full minute, paralyzed. She was wearing only a thin sweater and jeans. Within seconds, she was soaked to the bone. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked her off her feet. She hammered on the door, her knuckles bleeding against the wood. "Dad, please, I'm sorry. Just let me in, it's freezing." There was no answer. The porch light flickered and then died, leaving her in total darkness. Desperation took hold. She couldn't stay here. She began to walk down the long, winding driveway, her sneakers squelching in the mud. Every flash of lightning revealed a world turned upside down, branches snapping, trash cans tumbling down the street, and the rain coming down in sheets so thick she could barely breathe. She reached the main road. The streetlights were swaying violently, casting long, erratic shadows. Megan's teeth were chattering, so hard they ached. Her phone, which she had managed to keep in her pocket, was dead, water-damaged and useless. She was 15 years old, homeless, and according to the people who were supposed to love her, broken. "Maybe I am sick," she thought, a sob racking her chest. "Maybe there is something wrong with me. Why else would they choose her? Every single time." The cold began to seep into her bones, slowing her movements. She headed toward the town center, hoping to find a 24-hour diner or a library foyer, anywhere with a roof. Her vision was blurring, partly from the rain and partly from the sheer exhaustion of her grief. She reached a major intersection where the traffic lights were blinking a rhythmic, warning yellow. The wind roared in her ears, drowning out the sound of an approaching engine. Megan stepped off the curb, her mind a fog of pain. She didn't see the silver sedan hydroplaning toward her. She didn't see the headlights cut through the gloom until they were 10 feet away, blinding in white. The screech of brakes was lost to the thunder. The impact was a dull, heavy thud that vibrated through her entire being. Megan felt herself lifted off the ground, a moment of weightlessness before the world tilted. She hit the hood, then the cold, wet asphalt. Her head cracked against the pavement with a sickening sound. Pain, white, hot, and all-consuming, exploded behind her eyes. She lay in the middle of the road, the rain pouring into her open mouth. She couldn't move her legs. She couldn't even scream. Above her, the dark sky continued to weep. Through the haze, she heard a car door slam and the sound of splashing footsteps. "Oh, dear God!" "No!" A woman's voice cried out. A face appeared above her. It was a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that were now wide with horror. She had silver-streaked hair that was rapidly becoming drenched. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Don't you close those eyes," the woman commanded, her voice trembling but firm. She pulled off her own heavy wool coat and draped it over Megan's shivering frame. "Parents," Megan whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of her lips. "I'm calling them right now, honey. Give me a number." Megan shook her head weakly, a tear mixing with the rainwater on her cheek. They don't want me. They said, I'm sick." The woman, Ruth, froze. She looked at the small, broken girl on the ground, a child cast out into a literal and metaphorical storm. A look of profound, protective anger flashed across Ruth's face, replacing the fear. "Listen to me," Ruth whispered, gripping Megan's hand with a strength that felt like a lifeline. "They were wrong. You aren't sick, and you aren't alone anymore. I've got you." As the sirens began to wail in the distance, Megan's world finally drifted into a merciful black. The storm was still raging, but for the first time in 15 years, someone was holding her hand and refusing to let go. The transition from the cold, wet asphalt to the sterile, blinding whiteness of the emergency room was a blurred montage of agony and muffled voices. Megan drifted in a sea of semi-consciousness. She felt the jarring rhythm of the ambulance, the sharp sting of 4 needles, and the heavy, metallic scent of blood and antiseptic. But through every jolt and every flash of the fluorescent lights, there was a constant, a firm, warm hand gripping hers. Ruth sat in the plastic waiting room chair, her expensive wool coat ruined, her hair matted with rain and dried blood, Megan's blood. As the dean of graduate studies at State University, Ruth was a woman used to order, logic, and the pursuit of truth. What she had witnessed tonight defied all three. She has a grade 3 concussion, a fractured tibia, and internal bruising, a doctor said, approaching Ruth 2 hours later. We've stabilized her, but she's lucky. If you hadn't called 911 immediately and kept her still, the internal bleeding could have been fatal. Are you the mother? Ruth stood up, her back straightening with a dignity that commanded the room. I am the woman who hit her, but I am also the only person currently advocating for her. Have her parents been reached? The police tracked them down. They're on their way. Ruth nodded, her jaw tightening. She went back to Megan's room, watching the girl sleep. Megan looked so small under the heavy hospital blankets, her face pale and etched with a weary sadness that no 15-year-old should possess. Ruth thought back to the girl's whispered words in the rain. They don't want me. They said I'm sick. The words haunted Ruth. They echoed a hollow chamber in her own heart, a memory of a cold porch 35 years ago when her own father had cast her out for daring to choose education over the family's rigid, traditional expectations. The silence of the room was shattered by the heavy swinging of the double doors. Richard and Patricia Sterling marched in, followed by a wide-eyed Catherine. There were no tears of relief. There was no frantic rushing to the bedside to kiss Megan's forehead. Instead, Richard stood at the foot of the bed, his arms crossed over his chest like a judge presiding over a sentencing. Well, Richard said, his voice flat, she certainly made a scene, didn't she? Ruth stood up slowly. Your daughter was nearly killed tonight, Mr. Sterling. Patricia sighed, looking at Megan with a mixture of annoyance and exhaustion. She always had to be the center of attention. We told her to leave to cool off, and instead, she throws herself in front of a car just to make us look like monsters. I hit her, Ruth said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, low octave. She didn't throw herself anywhere. She was wandering in a gale, shivering and disoriented, because you locked her out of her home. Catherine huddled behind her mother, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. She pushed me, ma'am. She's dangerous. We were just trying to protect ourselves. Ruth turned her sharp, discerning gaze toward Catherine. She had spent decades reading students, identifying the subtle tells of academic dishonesty and manipulation. In Catherine's eyes, she didn't see trauma. She saw a predator wearing the skin of a lamb. Protect yourselves from a 15-year-old girl with a science fair ribbon in her pocket and nowhere to go, Ruth asked. The police are currently outside taking a statement about why a minor was found alone in a level 4 storm. I suggest you find a better story than she's dangerous. Richard's face flushed a deep, angry purple. This is a private family matter. Who do you think you are? I am Dr. Ruth Vance, she replied, throwing her professional weight into the room like a gauntlet. And I am the person who will be speaking with the social worker assigned to this case in exactly 10 minutes. The mention of a social worker sent a ripple of genuine fear through Patricia. For the Sterlings, image was everything. A police report was a nuisance. A child services investigation was a social death sentence. We'll take her home once she's discharged, Richard muttered, though he wouldn't look at Megan's sleeping form. We'll handle her sickness internally. No. A weak, cracked voice interrupted. Everyone turned. Megan was awake, her eyes clouded with pain but burning with a sudden, desperate clarity. She looked at her father, the man who had dragged her by the arm into the dark, and then at her mother, who had watched it happen. "I'm not going back," Megan whispered. "Megan, don't be dramatic," Patricia snapped. "You have nowhere else to go." Megan looked at Ruth. It was a silent plea, a drowning person reaching for a piece of driftwood. Ruth felt a surge of protective instinct so fierce it surprised her. She stepped to the side of the bed, placing herself physically between Megan and the Sterlings. "Actually," Ruth said, "she does. I have already begun the paperwork for temporary foster placement. I am a licensed educator and a certified advocate. Given the circumstances of her eviction, I doubt the state will find your home a suitable environment for her recovery." Richard laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You're going to take in a stranger? A girl you hit with your car? Good luck. She'll burn your life down, just like she tried to burn ours. She's broken, Dr. Vance. You'll see." "If she is broken, Mr. Sterling," Ruth said, her eyes flashing like steel, "it is because you and your wife spent 15 years trying to snap her. Now leave. This room is for healing, and your presence is a toxin." Humiliated and realizing they were losing the battle of optics, the Sterlings retreated. Richard threw one last look of disgust at Megan. "Fine. You want her? She's your problem. Don't come crawling back when she shows her true colors." The room became heavy with silence once the door swung shut. Megan began to shake, the adrenaline fading and leaving only the raw, jagged edges of her reality. She was truly alone. Ruth sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She didn't say it would be easy. "Megan, look at me." Megan raised her head. "You have two paths," Ruth said clearly. "You can let their words become your truth. You can spend your life trying to prove you aren't sick or broken to people who will never listen. Or you can let that Megan die tonight in the rain. You can start over. With me, I will give you the tools, the education, and the safety you deserve. But you have to be the one to build the life." "Why?" Megan sobbed. "You don't even know me." "Because someone did it for me," Ruth whispered, her eyes softening. "And because I saw your science fair flyer in the mud. A girl who cares about water filtration in the middle of her own chaos is a girl who wants to fix the world. I'd like to see what that girl can do when she isn't being suffocated." Megan looked at the door, then back at Ruth. The choice was a chasm. Behind her was the familiar pain of a Sterling house, the shadows, the lies, and the constant struggle to be seen. Ahead of her was a stranger, a silver-haired woman who spoke of tools and futures. "I want to disappear," Megan said, her voice gaining a sudden, hardened strength. "I want to be someone they can never find. I want to erase Megan Sterling." Ruth smiled, a small, knowing expression. "Then we have work to do." Over the next 6 months, the transformation began. With Ruth's high-powered legal connections and the undeniable evidence of child endangerment against the Sterlings, the transition was swift. The Sterlings, eager to avoid a public trial that would ruin Richard's standing in the community, signed over their parental rights with a chilling lack of hesitation. They were happy to be rid of the problem. Megan underwent several surgeries for her leg, but the deepest healing happened in Ruth's home. A house filled with books, classical music, and the quiet respect of two people who understood the value of silence. On a bright Tuesday morning in April, Megan stood in a quiet courtroom. She wasn't Megan Sterling anymore. She had worked with Ruth to choose a name that felt like a shield and a promise. "The petition for a legal name change is granted," the judge announced. As they walked out of the courthouse, Ruth handed Megan a new birth certificate and a passport. Megan looked at the printed ink. The name Sterling was gone. The history of the sick daughter was buried. "How does it feel?" Ruth asked as they stepped into the spring sunshine. Megan took a deep breath. the air no longer tasting of rain and blood, but of blooming jasmine and possibility. She looked at Ruth, the woman who had saved her, and then at the horizon. "It feels like the storm is finally over," she said. "Now, I want to learn how to build something that lasts." Megan leaned into her new life, leaving the ghosts of her past behind, unaware that 13 years later, she would return to confront them, not as a victim, but as the architect of their downfall. 13 years is an eternity when you are rebuilding a soul from the wreckage of a storm. For Megan, those years were a relentless pursuit of excellence, fueled by a quiet fire that Ruth Vance had carefully tended. In Ruth's home, the sick daughter narrative was replaced by a curriculum of resilience. There were no more manipulative tears to navigate, only the rigorous demands of higher education, the nurturing presence of a mentor who became a mother, and the profound, healing power of being believed. Under Ruth's guidance, Megan didn't just graduate, she dominated. She moved through her undergraduate years with a focus that bordered on the supernatural, earning a degree in education policy and a minor in psychology. She wanted to understand the systems that failed children, and more importantly, she wanted to understand the minds of people like her biological parents, those who could discard a child like a broken toy. By the age of 24, Megan had completed her master's degree. It was during a late-night study session in Ruth's wood-paneled library that the seed for her life's work was planted. "Ruth," Megan said, looking up from a stack of case studies on foster care outcomes. "The system assumes that once a kid is out of a toxic home, the battle is won. But the financial cliff they face at 18, it's a second abandonment. They have the drive, but they have no safety net." Ruth leaned back in her chair, her spectacles perched on the tip of her nose. "And what do you propose we do about it, Megan?" "I want to build that net," Megan replied, her eyes bright with a familiar, steely resolve. "I want to create a scholarship that isn't just about tuition. I want it to provide mentorship, housing, and a community. A second chance for those who were told they weren't worth a first one." With Ruth's formidable academic network and Megan's raw, lived experience, the Second Chance Scholarship was born. It started as a small pilot program at Ruth's University, funded by private grants and Megan's own tireless fundraising. Within 5 years, it had exploded into a national phenomenon. Megan became a sought-after speaker, a consultant for state education boards, and the CEO of a nonprofit that was literally saving lives. She was no longer the girl shivering in a wet sweater. She was a woman of substance, dressed in sharp, tailored suits, her voice steady and authoritative. She had legally changed her surname to Vance, officially severing the last tether to the sterling name. To the world, she was Megan Vance, the brilliant architect of educational equity. To herself, she was a survivor who had finally stopped looking over her shoulder. While Megan was building a legacy of truth, 40 miles away, the Sterling household was rotting under a veneer of gold leaf. Catherine Sterling had grown into exactly the woman her childhood promised. At 25, she was a lifestyle influencer with a following built entirely on a foundation of aesthetic lies. Her Instagram feed was a curated gallery of high-end brunches, spontaneous laughter, and heartwarming captions about family loyalty. To her 300,000 followers, Catherine was the miracle child, the only daughter of a devoted couple who had faced unspeakable tragedy. "Sometimes the pain of being an only child is the silence in the house," Catherine wrote in a viral post, posing in front of a fireplace with Richard and Patricia. "Losing my sister in that car accident when I was 12 broke our hearts, but it made us cherish every moment. Hug your loved ones tight. #family first, #grief and grace." Richard and Patricia had fully leaned into the lie. It was easier to tell the neighbors that Megan had died in the hospital that stormy night than to admit they had been investigated by child services and signed away their rights to a stranger. Over time, the lie became their reality. They had removed every photo of Megan, scrubbed her from their tax returns, and buried her memory in a shallow grave of convenience. They pampered Catherine to a fault, funding her failed business ventures and her expensive wardrobe, terrified that if they didn't keep her happy, the perfect family image would shatter. Catherine held the power now. She knew where the bodies were buried, figuratively and literally, and she used that leverage to keep her parents under her thumb. But Catherine's foundation was made of sand. Behind the filters, she was drowning in debt and desperate for the next big moment to keep her relevant. Her graduation from Riverside State University was supposed to be that moment, the ultimate branding opportunity. Back in the city, Megan stood in her high-rise office, staring at a formal invitation on her desk. "Riverside State University," she murmured. "They're desperate to have you, Megan," her assistant, David, said from the doorway. "President Walsh called 3 times this morning. He says the graduating class needs to hear your story of resilience. He's offering the keynote slot." Megan felt a strange, cold prickle at the back of her neck. She knew that school. It was the prestigious local college where Catherine had been studying, mostly social media marketing, for the last 6 years. "Check the graduation list, David," Megan said, her voice unusually tight. A few minutes later, David returned with a printout. "There's a Catherine Sterling graduating with a BA in communications." "Why? Do you know her?" Megan turned her chair toward the window, looking out at the sprawling city. The irony was almost poetic. For 13 years, she had stayed away. She had healed. She had conquered. And now, the universe was handing her a microphone and placing her directly in front of the people who had tried to erase her. "I know her," Megan said softly. "She's the reason the scholarship exists." That evening, Megan sat with Ruth on the patio of their home. The spring air was cool, reminiscent of the nights they spent talking after Megan's many surgeries. "They've invited me to speak at Catherine's graduation," Megan told her. Ruth paused, her teacup halfway to her lips. She looked at Megan, really looked at her. She saw the scars on Megan's leg, hidden under her trousers, and the invisible scars that had finally stopped aching. "Do you want to do it?" Ruth asked. "For years, I thought moving on meant staying hidden," Megan replied. "But Catherine is out there telling the world I'm dead. My parents are sitting in that house pretending they didn't commit a crime against their own blood. They've used my death to garnish sympathy for a decade." Megan stood up, walking to the edge of the patio. "I don't want revenge, Ruth. Revenge is small. I want the truth. I want to stand in that light and show them that the girl they called sick built a kingdom while they were busy decorating a prison." Ruth stood and joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are Megan Vance now. You are the director of a national movement. If you go there, you go as the woman I raised, not the girl they broke." "I know," Megan said, a dark, determined smile touching her lips. "That's exactly why I'm going." As the weeks led up to the ceremony, Megan prepared her speech with surgical precision. She didn't mention names in her draft. She focused on the statistics of abandonment, the psychology of toxic family dynamics, and the triumph of a second chance. Meanwhile, Catherine was posting countdowns to her big day. "So excited for the keynote speaker. They say she's a total boss babe. Can't wait to be inspired as I start my next chapter. #graduation, #new beginnings." Megan read the post and felt a chill of anticipation. Catherine had no idea that the boss babe she was so excited to hear from was the ghost she had spent 13 years trying to keep in the ground. The stage was set. The storm that had begun 13 years ago had traveled a long, circular path. It was finally heading back toward the Sterling house, and this time, Megan wasn't the one who would be caught in the rain. She was the lightning. The Riverside State University auditorium was a sea of velvet robes and mortarboards, buzzing with the electric energy of 1,000 graduates and their proud families. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and floral bouquets. High above the stage, a massive digital banner read, "Congratulations, class of 2026. In the 8th row, center aisle, Richard and Patricia Sterling sat rigidly, their faces etched with the practiced, aristocratic pride they wore like armor. Beside them sat Catherine, her graduation cap tilted at a perfect angle for her front-facing camera. She was busy recording a live story for her followers. "Hey guys, we're just minutes away," Catherine whispered into her phone, her voice a sugary trill. "So emotional today. Thinking of my sister who couldn't be here to see this. Everything I do for her memory. Love you all. #graduation day, #legacy. Patricia squeezed Catherine's hand, her eyes glistening with performative moisture. "She'd be so proud of you, darling. You're our only star now." A hush fell over the room as President Walsh stepped to the podium. Graduates, families, distinguished guests. Today, we are privileged to hear from a woman whose life is a testament to the very resilience we hope to instill in all of you. She is the founder of the National Second Chances Scholarship and a leading voice in educational justice. Please welcome Dr. Megan Vance. The applause was thunderous. Megan stepped out from the wings. She was draped in a sleek, midnight blue academic gown, her hair swept back in a professional, uncompromising style. Around her neck sat a simple pearl necklace, a gift from Ruth. She walked with a measured, rhythmic grace that radiated power. She reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. As she looked out into the crowd, the bright stage lights blurred the faces in the back, but the front rows were crystal clear. Megan's gaze locked onto the 8th row. She saw Richard first. He looked older, his hair thinner, but his expression was the same mask of arrogant entitlement she remembered from the night he threw her out. Then she saw Patricia, clutching a designer handbag. And finally, she saw Catherine. Catherine was looking up, her phone still raised to record the speaker. As Megan's face came into focus on Catherine's screen, the girl's hand began to shake. The sugary smile vanished, replaced by a look of visceral, primitive confusion. Catherine blinked, then squinted, her mouth dropping open in a silent O. Megan didn't flinch. She leaned into the microphone, her voice cool, steady, and amplified to every corner of the hall. "Good morning, class of 2026, Megan began. "When President Walsh asked me to speak about resilience, I spent a long time thinking about where resilience actually begins. Most people think it begins with a choice, but for many, it begins with a catastrophe." She paused, letting the silence settle like dust. "Let me tell you a story about a girl I once knew. She was 15 years old. She was a straight-A student, a science fair winner, and a daughter. But in her house, she lived in a shadow cast by a younger sister who had mastered the art of the lie. This sister didn't just want attention, she wanted total emotional monopoly. And she got it. In the 8th row, Richard Sterling went pale. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair, so hard the knuckles turned white. Patricia's hand went to her throat, her breath hitching in a sharp, audible gasp. 13 years ago, on a stormy October night, Megan continued, her voice dropping into a chillingly calm register. That younger sister staged a scene. She broke a family heirloom and framed her older sister for the assault. Their father, a man who prided himself on his standing in the community, didn't ask for proof. He didn't look for the truth. He called his 15-year-old daughter sick and broken, and then he dragged her to the door and threw her out into a literal hurricane. A low murmur rippled through the auditorium. The graduates began to shift in their seats, sensing that this wasn't a standard inspirational speech. "That girl was hit by a car 3 hours later," Megan said, her eyes fixed directly on Richard. "She nearly died on the asphalt while her parents sat in their warm house, comforted by the lies of their perfect remaining child. They were so committed to the lie that when the girl survived, they signed away their parental rights to a stranger just to avoid the social embarrassment of an investigation." Catherine's phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. She looked like she wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. The people sitting around the Sterlings began to whisper, their heads turning toward the family whose dead daughter seemed to be narrating her own ghost story from the podium. "For 13 years," Megan said, her voice rising in strength, "that family told the world the girl was dead. They used her death to garnish sympathy on social media. They built a brand out of a tragedy they created. They thought they had erased her." Megan took a step back from the podium, standing at her full, commanding height. "But you cannot erase the truth. My name is Megan Vance. But 13 years ago, my name was Megan Sterling. And I am the daughter you threw away." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of 1,000 people holding their breath. Then, the chaos began. Catherine stood up, her face a blotchy mess of terror and rage. "You're lying!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're not her! My sister is dead." But the auditorium was already erupting. Students who had followed Catherine's grief journey on Instagram were pulling out their phones, recording the scene. The only child narrative was shattering in real time. Megan looked at her father. Richard looked like he was having a stroke. He tried to stand, but his knees buckled, and he sank back into his seat, his eyes wide with the realization that his carefully constructed world had just been nuked on a public stage. "To the graduates," Megan said, ignoring the outburst from the 8th row, "my message to you is this. People will try to define you by your scars. They will try to tell you that you are sick when you are simply inconvenient to their narrative. Do not believe them. Build your own house. Find your own family. And never, ever be afraid to turn the lights on when the monsters are still in the room." Megan stepped away from the podium. Usually, a keynote ends with polite applause. This ended with a roar of a different kind, a mixture of shock, outrage, and a few standing ovations from students who had realized they were witnessing a historic moment of reckoning. As Megan walked off the stage, she saw Ruth waiting in the wings. Ruth didn't say a word. She simply opened her arms and held Megan in a fierce, silent embrace. Outside the auditorium, the fallout was instantaneous. Within 20 minutes, Megan Sterling and Catherine Sterling were trending on social media. The screenshots of Catherine's Grief and Grace posts were being shared alongside clips of Megan's speech. The hypocrisy was so blatant, so jagged, that the internet tore the Sterling family apart within the hour. Catherine tried to run from the building, but she was swarmed by her friends and followers, their faces no longer admiring, but filled with the cold curiosity of people watching a train wreck. "Did you really lie about her being dead?" one girl shouted. "Was the car accident a lie too?" Catherine pushed through them, sobbing, her graduation gown snagging on a bush. She looked for her parents, but Richard and Patricia were being escorted out a side door by university security, their heads bowed as the cameras of 100 smartphones captured their shame. The perfect Sterling family's reputation hadn't just crumbled, it had been pulverized into ash. And as Megan sat in the back of a town car with Ruth, heading away from the campus, she watched the university disappear in the rearview mirror. The unmasking was complete. The ghosts were out in the light. And for the first time in 13 years, Megan felt like she could finally breathe without the weight of a secret pressing against her chest. The silence inside the black town car was a stark contrast to the hurricane of noise Megan had left behind in the auditorium. Beside her, Ruth remained a pillar of quiet strength, her hand resting over Megan's. Outside the tinted windows, the world was moving on, but for Megan, the air felt fundamentally different, lighter, cleaner, as if a fever had finally broken. "Are you okay, Megan?" Ruth asked softly. Megan looked at her reflection in the glass. The woman staring back didn't look like a victim. She looked like a victor. "I feel finished, Ruth. For the first time, the story is actually over." But the Sterling family was not finished with her. As the car pulled toward the side exit of the campus to avoid the growing media scrum, a small group of figures burst from behind a brick pillar, waving their arms frantically. David, Megan's assistant who was sitting in the front, looked at the driver. "Keep going," he ordered. Wait, Megan said, her voice sharp and clear. Stop the car. Megan, you don't have to do this, Ruth warned. They are desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. I know, Megan replied, straightening her blazer. But I spent 15 years running from their shadows. I'm not going to spend the next 13 hiding from their light. I want them to see me. One last time. The car came to a smooth halt. Megan stepped out into the afternoon sun, the heavy academic gown now folded neatly on the seat behind her. Standing by the pillar were Richard, Patricia, and Catherine. The transformation in them was harrowing. Richard's expensive suit was rumpled, his face a sickly shade of gray. Patricia looked like she had aged a decade in an hour. Her makeup was smeared, and her hands were trembling so violently she had to clasp them together. But it was Catherine who looked the most shattered. Her graduation cap was gone, her hair was a tangled mess, and her eyes were red-rimmed and wild. "Megan!" Patricia cried, taking a stumbling step forward. "Megan, please. We had no idea. We didn't know you had become this." "You mean you didn't know I was successful?" Megan said, her voice devoid of heat. It was the coldness of a glacier. "If I had been a failure, if I were still that girl shivering in the rain, would you be standing here right now?" Richard stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Megan, listen to me. We made a mistake. A terrible, tragic mistake. That night, the storm. I wasn't in my right mind. I've regretted it every single day. Regret is a convenient emotion when your reputation is being incinerated on national news, Richard," Megan said. She didn't call him Dad. That word had died in the mud 13 years ago. "You didn't regret it when you signed the papers to give me away. You didn't regret it when you told your neighbors I was dead, so you wouldn't have to explain your cruelty." "Megan, please," Catherine sobbed, her voice a jagged ruin of its former sugary self. "My life is over. My friends, they've blocked me. The university is talking about an ethics review for my social media conduct. Everyone is calling me a monster. You have to tell them. Tell them it was just a family misunderstanding. Tell them we're okay now." Megan looked at her sister. She saw the same manipulative spark behind the tears, the same desperate need to pivot the narrative back to herself. "Is that why you're here, Catherine? To save your brand?" Megan asked. "You told the world I died in a car accident. You used my death to gain followers. You didn't just lie, you profited from my absence. There is no misunderstanding that fixes 13 years of being a ghost. We can start over," Patricia wailed, reaching out to touch Megan's arm. Megan stepped back, and Ruth appeared at her side, her presence a silent, immovable barrier. "We're your family, Megan. Blood is thicker than water." "Blood is just biology, Patricia," Megan replied, her voice gaining a sudden, resonant power. "Family is the person who sits by your hospital bed when you're a stranger. Family is the person who pays for your surgeries, who teaches you how to walk again, and who believes in your dreams when everyone else calls you sick. Ruth is my mother. You are just the people I used to know." Richard looked at Ruth, his eyes filled with a mixture of jealousy and shame. "You stole her from us," he hissed. "No, Richard," Ruth said, her voice cutting like a diamond. "You threw her away. I simply recognized a masterpiece when I saw one in the rain. You are the only thieves here. You stole 15 years of a daughter's love because you were too proud to see the truth." Megan looked at the three of them, the broken remnants of a sterling legacy. She felt a profound sense of pity, but no desire to heal them. "I have something for you," Megan said. She reached into her bag and pulled out 3 business cards for the second chance of scholarship. She handed them to Catherine. "What is this?" Catherine asked, bewildered. "It's what I do now," Megan said. "I help people who have been abandoned. Since your friends have left you and your parents' reputation is gone, you might find yourself needing a second chance. But don't look for it from me. Look for it in the truth. Does this mean you forgive us?" Patricia whispered, hope sparking in her eyes. "I forgave you a long time ago," Megan said, and the sincerity in her voice was the final blow. "But I didn't do it for you. I did it so I wouldn't have to carry your voices in my head anymore. I forgave you so I could be at peace. But forgiveness is not the same as access." Megan took a deep breath, feeling the final tether snap. "You will never see me again. You will not call me. You will not email me. If you attempt to contact me or Ruth, my legal team will ensure that the remaining fragments of your lives are handled with the same discipline you showed me when I was 15. "Megan, wait!" Richard called out, but Megan was already turning away. She didn't look back as she stepped into the car. She didn't look back as the driver pulled away, leaving the three of them standing in the middle of a campus that no longer respected them, in a world that finally knew their names for all the wrong reasons. As the car reached the highway, heading back toward the home she had built with Ruth, Megan leaned her head against the headrest. The sunset was painting the sky in vibrant shades of gold and amber. "You did it, Megan," Ruth said softly. "No," Megan replied, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "We did it." Megan looked out at the horizon, her mind drifting to the thousands of students her scholarship would help in the coming years. She realized then that her life hadn't been defined by the night she was thrown out. It had been defined by every day she chose to get back up. She had spent years wondering if she was truly sick or broken, as her father had said. But now she knew the truth. She was the most whole person she knew. She had survived the storm, she had endured the flood, and finally, she had become the sunlight that burned the clouds away. In the quiet of the car, Megan Vance finally closed her eyes. The ghosts were gone. The voices were silent. And for the first time in her life, the peace wasn't just a boundary, it was a home. She wasn't just a survivor of the storm. She was the architect of a new world, and the foundation was finally, perfectly, unshakably solid.